Hey, welcome back. My name's Kurt, and I want to talk some more today about recording and mixing. If you guys were here watching yesterday, thank you. Welcome back. And for those of you just tuning in today for the first time, thanks for tuning in. Just want to quickly thank the band Nice Hooves, whose video you just watched. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to record a great band full of great people, and I find that the quality of my output and also the quality of my life is better when I'm working with people and working on music that I really enjoy. So hopefully you guys get to have those kind of experiences as well. Just a quick recap of what we talked about yesterday. There's a lot of really broad brush stuff and sort of some right-brained stuff, but we also got into a lot of really specific technical mumbo jumbo as well. But for me, the big takeaways of yesterday's class was when you're working with a client, remember that they are entrusting you with their baby, and you should treat them with the same respect and treat their music with the same respect that you would want paid to you if you were entrusting your baby in someone else's hands. So just never lose sight of that as you're recording a band. And the other big takeaway from yesterday's class is that as a recording engineer, you are required to manage a ton of little minutia, and it's the cumulative effect of all that minutia that creates the record or the song or whatever it may be. But ultimately, it's the song that's the most important, and you have a bunch of tools at your disposal, be it the rooms that you're recording in, the people that you're recording, the instruments that they're playing, the microphones you have, the mic preamps, the recorder, whatever it may be. These are just your tools, but don't lose sight of the fact that these are only tools used to create the final product, which is the recorded version of that song. So always keep that final product in mind as you are recording a band. So that's yesterday. Now today, we're going to finish up talking a little bit about tracking, beginning with bass and vocals. And we'll do one segment on that, and then the balance of the day will be about mixing. I'm lumping the bass and vocals together in one segment for two reasons. Number one, bass shares a lot of the engineering requirements with guitar. We've already covered guitar in great detail, so we don't need to spend quite as much time on bass. The other reason is because engineering a vocal isn't really the most complicated thing in the world, so it's usually one or two microphones as opposed to a bunch of mics, and it's not, because the body is the instrument, there's not as much of a selection process to choosing the right instruments to record. You sort of get what you get when it comes to a person's voice. I will talk about vocal coaching and how to get someone sounding their best and how to make them comfortable. That'll take care of one segment. But the other big reason why I'm lumping them together is that when you're recording a singer, you really need to keep in mind that this person will not have the same stamina that, say, a drummer or particularly like a guitar player or a bass player would have. Especially if you're recording music like me, where the singers are singing very loud and aggressively, you might get 30 minutes to 2 hours out of them in one day before they ruin their voice. So I feel as though it's important not to wait until the very end of the recording process to record vocals. If at all possible, you should be flip-flopping vocals with another instrument so that the singer can work until they feel like they're at the point where if they go any further, they're going to damage their voice, and then switch to something else. So typically, I even start shortly after I'm done with drums, when I start recording guitars. Once I have some decent rhythm guitar tracks down for 2 or 3 songs, I'll put it in the singer's hands and say, are you ready to start singing now? And we can toggle between vocals and all the other instruments. So rather than being forced to record an entire album in a couple of 8 or 10 hour sessions, the singer can spread out their vocals over the course of a week or whatever it may be. So with that being said, let's get right into bass. I think we have a short sort of fly on the wall style video about recording bass in my studio that we can play now. The new My new trick with this V4, and one of the reasons why I like it is it's got well, this all the lettering's worn off in this one, but there's 2 channels. Each input goes to each channel, but you can mix them together like it's a mixer. So I do one distorted channel and one clean channel at the same time, and then kind of blend. So you get you get some punch and depth out of the clean channel, and then the growl out of the distortion channel. So in theory, I should be able to get meat and growl. That's pretty much that vibe, I dig it. I don't know if you need to raise your strap a little or something, but I feel like you're too diagonal with your picking. Yeah, so Kenny from Nice Loves is awesome. He's a one-take wonder, and it's really a joy to record a bass player that can just go nail it, because a lot of bass players tend to be failed guitarists or guitarists who got demoted, oh, it'll be easier because it only has 4 strings or something. I guess I set out to play bass in a band, and I thought it would be the fastest way to get into a band. But anyway, it's a joy to record somebody like Kenny who's can just pretty much nail it in 1 or 2 takes every time. So anyway, that's a typical day of recording bass around my studio, and we're using actually this cool bass that I got from Warwick. It's the Star Bass 2. It's a hollow body bass made from Bubinga plywood that sounds really killer. It's super aggro sounding, really mid-range forward. But it has 2 pickups. So I do want to talk a little bit about pickup blending on basses. This, usually my favorite type of bass to record is a P bass, and I think a lot of that is because it just has 1 pickup. I have a harder time recording, say, a jazz bass or some of those 2 pickup Music Mans or something. I find that a lot of bass players feel a broader sound when they're blending the 2 pickups on their bass, and tend to favor that because they get some attack and they get some bottom by blending a bridge and a neck pickup. However, I feel as though there's a little bit of phase cancellation that happens when you have a 2 pickup bass that you have to be careful about. Also, actually this Star Bass, it's 2 single coils, so and one of them is reverse wound. So when you're in the middle position, the 2 coils will cancel hum. So that's another reason why bass players will tend to blend pickups, and jazz basses are the same way too. It's two single coils, and I think one of them is reverse wound. So when you're in the in-between position, you get a hum cancellation. However, you also get these subtle phase discrepancies when you blend pickups. So, and you'll notice that, as I'm sure a lot of you have had the experience of, when you just play a chromatic scale on a bass, there'll be spots on the neck that are extra live and spots on the neck that are extra dead. And I find that just going to 1 pickup as opposed to blending 2 will reduce those cancellations that cause the dead spots on the neck. So with Kenny, we were using just the bridge pickup on that bass because the Nice Hooves bass tone is quite mid-rangey and growly and sort of guitar-like, and it finds its own space in the mix, not so much from having a dramatically different frequency response from the guitar, but more from its panning space being centered and then the guitars being panned out. So once you find the optimum pickup to use on the bass, then you got to select a bass rig and dial that in. And I select a bass rig in much the same way that I select a guitar rig. I get whatever cabinets I have at my disposal and whatever heads I have at my disposal. And if the bass player brought in their own stuff, I'll check that out first and see what I like about it, see what I don't like, and also sort of poll them to see what it is that they like about their sound and what it is that they don't like, and then also trying to learn their terminology. Like to one bass player, punchy means, kind of distorted and very mid-range forward and sort of almost sounding like the piano, the bass notes on a piano where it's like percussive but growly. For others, punchy means super clean, high headroom, deep bass with also some clack on top. So try to determine what the terminology is that they're using and find things in the bass rig that that captures what they like and what is applicable to the song. In the case of Nice Hooves, we ended up settling on an Ampeg V4 guitar head through an Ampeg 8x10 bass cab. And I think the V4 was sort of made back in the days when there weren't typically dedicated guitar and bass amps. You just sort of had an amplifier and you plugged your keyboard or your harmonica or your bass or guitar or whatever into it. There is an Ampeg V4B, which is the bass version. I think the gain staging is a little different and the EQ is voiced in a different location, but it's essentially the same amp. But I prefer the V4R for bass, especially aggressive bass. It's a little more gainy and a little more gnarly in the mid-range. I do tend to, whereas with guitar, I'm a little bit nervous when combining multiple signals, whether it be multiple amps or multiple microphones on a guitar. For bass, I almost always do that. I like to have a little bit more independent control of different elements of bass, be it a DI, a clean amplifier, a distorted amplifier, the high frequencies, mid-range, lows. I'll do all sorts of different tricks with the bass guitar in order to have independent control of these things. Sometimes even multi-band compression. And we're going to talk more about that in the mixing portion of this thing, about how to manage the different bass elements. But at the tracking phase, sometimes I'll do a DI, sometimes I won't, a lot of times I won't, but I usually do some sort of clean distortion blend, and that can be done in a number of different ways. Nate Newton, the bass player of Converge, my band, he plays out of an Orange 8200 and an Orange Thunderverb, and he will set up the 8200 a little on the clean side, and that has a ton of bottom end and also sort of a clacky, not super clacky, not like corn clacky, but it's got some pick attack to it on the top end, but not a whole lot going on in the mid range. And then his and that's going through an 8x10 cabinet. And then his Thunderverb has a ton of mid range, and that's going through a 215, which actually the 8x10, despite the fact that it doesn't reproduce a fundamental frequency as low as a 215, it exaggerates the sort of upper bass / low mid stuff. So you have a greater perceived bottom end coming out of that cabinet. The 215 feels a little bit more guitar-y. So that's like the mid-range stuff is coming out of there. So it's sort of like what I was talking about for guitar yesterday, where I'll pick amps, cabinets, and microphones that actually sort of exaggerate the inherent quality of that amplifier. So like the mid-range guitar amp might go through an even mid-rangier cab and use a mid-rangey mic so that it has less of a phase correlation with the scooped guitar amp through the scooped cab through the scooped mic. Same thing with bass. But for the case of Nice Hooves, I decided to do it all at one amp. And I think I have a little video sort of demonstrating after the fact that after I recorded Nice Hooves, and I went back for Gear Gods and did a little a video detailing what that blend entailed. So if we could play that right now, that would be cool. So today I'm going to be playing bass out of a Magnavox era V4 guitar amp that Brian from Tratham actually owns, and he abandoned it here. So I'm using it on bass because I think it sounds pretty gnarly. One thing that I like to do with bass is to split the signal up into different components. So sometimes it's blending a DI and an amplifier. Other times it's using two different amps. Like Nate in Converge, he likes to use these two orange amps where he has an 8200 kind of doing the bass and the treble, and then a Thunderverb kind of doing the mid-range. But today I'm going to do both of those things within just the V4. So the way that I have the signal routed here is start with this Warwick Starbase 2, and then that goes into the input of a Radial JD7, which is a 7-way splitter box. And I like using this because it gives me control of the polarity of the outcoming signal, as well as a ground lift for each output. So coming out of the JD7, we have one cable that's just the clean signal from the bass going into input 1 on the V4, which is controlled by volume 1 here. The labels have all worn off on this particular amp, so you don't really know what it is unless I tell you. So volume 1 is the clean signal. Also coming out of the JD7 from another output is a signal going through this regular ass Boss overdrive distortion pedal that my buddy Rob Davis kind of tweaked out for me. And that goes into input number 2 on the V4 with its own volume control. The EQ controls are shared between volume 1 and 2, but using the two separate inputs allows me to blend my clean and distortion at the amp. Some pedal manufacturers are smart enough to put a blend control on the actual distortion pedal. There's not one on this pedal, so I'm doing the blend at the amp. You can also use this technique with a lot of different other amps, like a Fender Bassman or an Ampeg SVT or a Vox AC30 or older Marshalls. The blending technique works as well on guitar as it does on bass too. So let's hear how it sounds. Here's just the clean component of the signal. All right, so with that, I'm just looking for some punch and a little bit of clack. Now let's turn off this output and turn on the distorted output and only listen to the distorted signal. All right, so that's the clean and distorted signals on their own. Now let's hear them together. So it sounds pretty cool. One thing I've noticed when blending signals is that a lot of distortion pedals actually invert the polarity of the incoming signal. So when you're blending the signals together, you need to then sometimes invert the polarity on just the distorted signal to restore it to its original polarity so that it effectively blends with the clean sound. You can do that either by making yourself a custom little cable that reverses the tip and sleeve, or in the case of this radial box, I actually have a polarity switch, which is this little 180 degrees guy here. So let's hear what it sounds like without the polarity flipped, followed by with the polarity flipped. You can really hear a difference in the bottom end. I mean, yeah, that amp's certainly a little rough around the edges and got some scratchy pots and whatnot, but yeah, cool bass tone, and that's just one way to do the clean distortion blend. We were going for a twangy sound, so we did it with a V4, but you can do it with a lot of things. The sometimes the Boss bass overdrive pedal, as simple as it is actually a great choice, and that one has the clean blend or the clean dry built into it. And a distorted signal's the character of the distortion usually will carry through even if you just blend it in a small amount. So you can, like a clean bass will not have as much character and will not cut through the mix the way that a distorted bass will, or it won't be so obvious in the mix, but you might be able to get the dynamics from the clean stuff and the character from the distorted stuff. Another way to do that whole blend thing is there's a few companies, I know Carl Martin is one of them. They have a pedal called the Paraloop that allows you to do sort of a clean distortion blend. So if you're getting your gain from a pedal as opposed to the overdrive on the head, you could find like a fuzz pedal you really like that maybe has a rad tone but doesn't have the clarity that you need, and get that Paraloop pedal, put the fuzz pedal in the Paraloop, and then sort of dial in the right percentage to put it as a front end to your bass rig and get the clean distortion blend. So yeah, and I've done that whole blend a million different ways. SVTs work cool. Even solid state amps, GKs are cool. I was actually just at NAMM last week, the sort of totally overwhelming giant guitar center thing, but there were some cool new products I saw, and I was in the Orange Amps demo room, and they had this new bass amp. I think it's called an OBK1 or something like that. It's like a super high powered solid state bass amp that actually has that clean distortion blend built into the head. And so if you're okay with having shared EQ between your clean channel and your distorted channel, you can sort of dial in a distorted sound and then make it super overdrive, but then adjust the blend control and back off on how much overdrive is in the final signal. Okay, so now we have a bass sound that we love. We think it sounds great in the room. We think it's going to work in the context of the song. Then it's time to mic up the bass rig. And this is another thing where I like to kind of, in a sense, bi-amp it and split the mics up into several different signals. I usually use 2 microphones on a bass cabinet, sometimes more. Some people love to use condenser microphones on bass. The AKG 414 EB is a particularly popular one. I've used my Wonder CM7 FET a lot, which is like a U47 FET clone. Anything sort of in that U47 family, like a Blue Mouse, for example, is a pretty or somewhat affordable alternative to that. I don't usually use condensers on bass, but a lot of people love them. I'm usually looking for that sort of presence push of a dynamic mic on bass. Some of my favorite bass mics are the Beyer M88, an AKG D12, or a Heil PR31. I tend to stay away from bass drum microphones on bass because they already are sort of pre-EQ'd to exaggerate bottom end and remove low mid-range. But if you're working quickly, or if that's the sound you want, D12s, D6s, or excuse me, D112s, D6s, Beta 52s might be a good choice. And those mics also might be a great choice if you are blending a brighter mic like a 57 or something with one of those guys, and you need to to kind of split up your highs and your lows. For the Nice Of session, what you saw was a Heil PR31 sort of aimed at the edge of the dust cap on one of the speakers to get some of the bright stuff. That's a pretty bright microphone position, and that's a fairly neutral mic, but maybe a little bit mid-range forward. And then that's being combined with a Yamaha sub kick on one of the lower speakers, which captures all the sub bass. And this sub kick is essentially a speaker working in reverse, and you can do that. You can buy the Yamaha sub kick and do that, or you can go to Radio Shack and get a little $20 subwoofer and wire that up to an XLR connector and send that to a mic preamp. If you do that trick, I'll advise you that low impedance microphone preamps tend to work better. If you have something that does like 300 ohms or something like that, you might have better results than a standard high impedance microphone preamp. So I've got the 2 microphones on the bass cab, And with this band, where it's sort of guitar-y sounding bass, I like to send my main sort of most toneful microphone, which in this case is the Heil PR31, into a guitar type mic preamp, usually something with a transformer in it. Some of my favorite mic preamps for bass are, you know, anything Neve styled, anything API style, anything Trident styled. In my studio, my Neve style preamp is a Chandler LTD1. My API style things, I have an OSA mic preamp, I forget the model number. And I have a bunch of Day King mic preamps, which are sort of related to the Trident A range. And also, and actually, the one that I actually use probably the most is actually a John Hardy microphone preamp, which is a lesser known choice, but still pretty cool microphone preamp. And that one, I believe, does not have any capacitors. That's the thing that sets it apart from other microphone preamps. And then with that one, I'm going for, you know, a fairly colored signal, and I don't mind getting the extra harmonics that the transformers from those mic preamps will provide. However, the bottom end of the signal, which in this case was the Yamaha sub kick, I like to have more of like a high headroom type of preamp. And I think that I used a Thermionic Culture Early Bird mic preamp, which has a low impedance setting. It's a tube mic preamp, but it's a very super hi-fi preamp, so getting very clean dynamic bottom end. And then I might even EQ that a little bit further, where I do like a high pass on the guitar-y bass mic and some sort of like a low pass filter, or maybe even a low mid cut on the sub kick, to sort of move them away from each other more and give them less of a phase correlation. But I will, of course, check the polarity of each of the mic preamps and try to find the best polarity position. I think I have another short video that details how I position the mics and how I choose the mics and how I move them. I think if you haven't yet switched to the video, when I'm not using, in this video, I'm not using the sub kick. I'm actually using a SE VR1, which is a really deep sounding ribbon microphone, and I'm capturing my bottom end with that. All right, so let's check out that video. I'm gonna blend two microphones on this bass rig. The first one is an SE VR1, which is a figure 8 pattern ribbon mic. So because it's figure 8, it picks up in front and behind the mic, but rejects the stuff to the sides. So it's rejecting this adjacent speaker and really just picking up the primary speaker here. It's a really bassy mic, and I'm putting it in a particularly bassy microphone position to really get the bottom end from this microphone. Over here, we have a Heil PR31, which is a dynamic cardioid mic, and I've positioned that in the center of the cone, so that's going to get the really bright stuff in the upper mid-range. And that makes it easier to blend, and you get fewer phase discrepancies when blending really different sounding signals than you do when you're blending really similar sounding signals. Okay, here's what the VR1 sounds like. And here's what the PR30 sounds like. Here's them together. There's a number of different ways to get two mics in phase with each other. If you keep the two mics on separate tracks in a DAW, you can use some sample alignment to line them up after the fact. But sometimes you want to do that in the analog domain while you're tracking and getting your sound. And one way that you can do that is to blast a bunch of noise out of the amplifier that you're using, put on a set of headphones, send that signal from the amp to your headphones, and then listen to the noise coming through the two microphones and see how it correlates with each other. What I've done here is I've flipped the polarity on the Heil PR31, and then I'm going to blast some noise through the amp and then move the mic in and out, find the null point where the noise cancels the most, and then at that point I'll know what the optimum phase position is. I'll just go back into my control room after the fact, flip the polarity 180 degrees on this mic, and then I'll have the best phase position. All right, so let's give it a try. That should be good. All All right, so that last little thing can be kind of difficult to hear, and you really got to know what you're listening for. But just to sort of explain that again, essentially what I did was I sort of cranked the gain on the distortion pedal leading into the amp just to get a bunch of like what's essentially white noise coming through the amp. Broad, actually more like pink noise because I want like broadband stuff. I want some bottom end and some top, and sort of that gives you like rather than a person playing through the amp, by just using that noise, you get like a steady state signal going through it. And then you can move the two microphones around in relation to each other to find what is the greatest point of cancellation. Actually, just quick step back. Before I do that, I'll intentionally invert the polarity of one of the microphones and then move the microphones around until I find where they cancel the most. And then it can be a bit hard to do when you have two microphones with a very different tone, since there's not as much phase correlation as if you were to just take two SM57s and do this with them. You'd really hear it really well if you did that with two of the same microphones. Two different microphones, you might not hear it as much. But yeah, so move the mics around, find where the signal cancels the most, and then once you find that place where it cancels the most, go back into your control room area or to wherever your microphone preamp is, reverse the polarity of that microphone preamp, and now the area that canceled the most is going to add the most. And that's one way to position microphones. Certainly sample alignment after the fact, if they're on separate tracks, is another way to do it. And visually lining up the capsules is another way to do it. And I encourage you to try all three techniques or a combination of those three techniques and see if that helps you get a more phase coherent bass tone. Okay, so now we have an awesome bass sound. We've done a little bit of an EQ to it, maybe to bring out the mid-range, bring out the growl. We might have sucked out a little bit of low mid with some EQ to give it some size and to set the sound stage. If you want a bass sort of in front of the speakers, you might have a little more low mid. If you want it sort of set back, you might want a little bit less low mid. And then you have independent control of at least the upper frequency spectrum of the bass and the lower frequency spectrum of the bass. The upper frequency spectrum is going to be interacting with the guitars and the vocals a lot, and the lower frequency spectrum is going to be interacting with the drums a lot. So it's nice to have separate control of those two things so that their interaction with the rest of the mix can be controlled best during the mix phase.